welcome to Backyard Farmer. I'm Kim Todd, and we're glad you could join us for another hour of good gardening. We have a full show of answering your gardening questions. If you'd like to join us for a future show, you can send us emailed pictures and questions to byf@unl.edu. We do need to know as much as you can tell us about your question, including where you live. We can't get to everybody's questions on the air, but you can always search for answers on our social media sites, YouTube, or the past shows, and our followers on Facebook. We'd also like to start always with samples, and Matt, you had a good plugger to pull those out of the ground.
Yeah, so it was wet, wasn't too hard. We've had plenty of rain lately, so it's easy to get these out of the ground. So what I brought today was Yellow Nutsedge, and maybe not thinking about it yet, but it's gonna be one of those weeds where it's a shocker when it comes out, and you're like, what is this light green grass poking through my lawn? And actually now is the time that you're not going to normally see it in a thick lawn. In bare areas, it's going to be poking out and maybe even getting to this height where it's already establishing a good root system. It is a perennial, and it comes from the tubers that are underground. So if you can see that I took this plug, and it's probably about 3 inches. If we look underneath, you can actually see that there is some tubers in here, at least you could see earlier. I can actually dig one out here, which this one hasn't sprouted yet, and it's just a little brown tuber, which is kind of be hard to see on the camera, but right here is a brown tuber, and these are what sprout throughout the year. So soil temps down at 3 inches are probably not going to be high enough to sprout that little tuber down there. But these go even deeper into the soil, so that's why when you try and control yellow nutsedge, which everybody probably has tried, or whoever hasn't just has more of it, but you think it doesn't work. It might actually be working, but some of those that haven't emerged yet, it's not going to work on those tubers that are in the soil. So as a perennial, some of those won't come up this year. They'll come up the following year or the following year after that. So you have to be persistent in trying to control this weed, and don't get discouraged when you still have it the next year. It's going to take probably 3-4 years to actually get it under control to where you're going to have really low populations. So my best recommendation would be to treat earlier than later. So if you can see it down in the canopy, or you know you had it last year, now is actually a better time to treat than waiting till, let's say, July, when it's already throwing new tubers down and you're going to have a bigger crop next year. So what we've seen in research, I've been spraying them for at least 10 years, and it seems like the earlier we can get to them, the better. Sedge Hammer is one of the products that works great. There's other ones that work great as well, but that one, following up with like 6 weeks after application, if you apply now, does a really good job of controlling those that emerge later. So getting a handle on it is very important.
I think there'll be a lot of people happy to hear that.
We'll see a lot of pictures on these, I think, in the next couple weeks.
All right, thank you, Matt.
Thanks.
All right, Kyle, beauty in the pathological world.
Yeah, so have a Anthracnose, and we've been having a lot of calls about Anthracnose in the past 2 weeks. So Anthracnose is it's a common name for a whole bunch of different fungi. Basically, every plant that's out there has a type of Anthracnose that can infect it. And today I brought Anthracnose on a sugar maple, and also on an ash tree. So even though we do have the emerald ash borer to worry about, there are other things that are attacking ashes. But Anthracnose on shade trees, very common this year because of our long extended spring that we've had. And so anytime we have a cool, wet bud break period, Anthracnose has a higher likelihood of causing some issues. And one of the ways that we can often identify Anthracnose is it tends to be associated with the veins. And the reason for that is, as we think about leaf development inside of those buds, the first things that develop are the veins, and so that's the first thing that the fungus has a chance to attack. Now, unfortunately, not a whole lot of great controls for Anthracnose, and it tends to be so seasonal anyway that we tend not to recommend control unless it is a very high value specimen that we're dealing with. So really, it's just one of those things that we can live with right now. This time of year, there's really nothing to do anyway. So maybe just try to enjoy the black leaves and slightly deformed leaves as a a different thing to see this year.
Variegation.
Variegation,
in
exactly.
A different way.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Kyle. Let's have some beauty on the end of the table instead.
Some real variegation here.
Real, yeah.
Well, I have 3 different things and a little bit of a story between each one, so I'll try to go quickly. I'll start off with the white flat-topped flower here. This is Wood Vibernum. And I brought that in. You know, a lot of times we'll get questions about what's a good plant for a tough spot, a sunny spot. Maybe it gets a little wet, maybe it gets a little dry. Arrowwood's a pretty tolerant plant. Kind of, I don't want to call it bulletproof because I'm sure Kyle will find some disease on it when I set it down. But it's a pretty tough plant, performs year in and year out. They can get big. There are selections out there of different sizes, different berry colors, different fall colors. So there's a lot of choices out there with arrowwood. But Viburnum dentatum is the scientific name. So if you're looking for that on the pots, that's what you want to look for. I have the peonies, so the white flowers, big white flowers, mostly just because there was a question last week, I think, about moving peonies now.
Right.
And this is one of those, again, that to avoid diseases and maybe some of the other problems you might be having with peonies, this is a good time of year to look at them if you have them in your yard and think about, okay, so in August, when Kim says you should divide your peonies, you're ready, you have a plan in place, you know, versus, oh, here goes another year and I can't remember exactly what happened, although I remember that being a problem. So that was just kind of my reminder about that. And then the last one here with the variegated pink leaves is tricolor beech. It's for us, a smaller, slow-growing tree. I haven't seen them much more than 15 feet tall, really, around here. Have you seen them bigger than that? Have you?
The biggest one in Lincoln is probably 30, but it's ancient, and it's in a perfect spot. Yeah.
And so I think it's a pretty tough tree. We haven't had any problems with it. You know, we had the funky weather this year over the winter and now this spring. Not a problem with it. Not a leaf out of place, literally. I think probably the challenge with it, though, and that's why I brought it, was if Kim wanted to mention just from a design standpoint how to use it properly, because it is a bit of a firecracker in your yard.
Right, and that pink and the white variegation, depending on how much you get with it, it really shows off against a dark background. So don't put it in a place where you don't want people to look. That's really the main thing. And also, I do know that the big one that I'm talking about on the street side, if it's really hot, even though it's in a very shaded, protected location, those leaf margins will burn because of the chlorophyll issue.
Yeah.
But pretty popular, not a tree for full sun southwest construction soil sites in new neighborhoods.
Right.
Yeah, excellent. That's a beautiful combination, Jeff. All right, ready for our first picture. So, Matt, this is a Lincoln viewer who says, is this a weed with the lavender flowers? They're taking over the garden, about 12 inches tall with a long stem. And there we can see the flowers.
It can be a weed if it's not in the spot you want it, but it's generally not a weed. It's kind of it grows in woodlands, so it's Virginia waterleaf. And it does pretty well in those shady, damp areas. And the telltale sign usually is on the leaves. It has those like those white spots that kind of look like water drops. So it looks, that's where it gets its name, waterleaf. But no, it's not a bad plant to have. If you don't mind it there, it actually is a good pollinator, and it can be left alone. And if you want to get rid of it, I guess just try and dig it out, or mowing over these areas can take care of the plant as well. It is a perennial.
All right, excellent. Your next one is, she has started seeing this all over in the perennial flower bed. She can't seem to identify it. Does appear to set small, and she says yellow flowers as the summer progresses. Is this a bad actor or something that we should encourage? He suspects that this is one we want to get rid of.
Yeah, it's the same, similar to the last one. It's kind of a, edge of the crick species. Wood avens is what it's called, and it's actually part of the Rosaceae family. So it is not a bad plant, but it can spread. It is also a perennial. So if you don't want this plant, you're going to have to either dig it out if it's just a couple of them in an area. It spreads by seed, but it also is St. Benedict herb is what it's known for, or known as. So it actually has a bunch of medicinal properties that has been used for the last 1,000 years, and it has a bunch of different cures that are usually tied to this plant. And then there's actually one below it. There's kind of a purplish leaf plant below this one, which I could not figure out what it was back on April 1st. And that one is white avens. So it's another, I mean, that one is considered a weed. It actually pops up in turf because it's a low-growing species. So that one is also kind of a weed, I guess, if it's not in the right spot. But they both produce, I mean, that one, the Benedict herb produces a nice flower and can be a good pollinator as well.
All right, and your final one is also a Lincoln viewer. They want to know what this yellow flower is and how do they rid their lawn of it?
Yellow wood sorrel, and it is very popular right now. I've seen a lot of it with those nice yellow flowers. And to get rid of it in the lawn, the product that is best on this is Triclopyr. It works really well, so it's not very hard to control if you can get that app down sooner than later. Before it sets those seed heads, they kind of look like an upright banana, and when they dry out and you pop them, it just shoots the seed out in a foot radius or more. So it spreads very rapidly if you don't control it before it produces seed.
All right, thank you, Matt. All right, Kyle, your first two pictures are here in Lincoln, and they've been observing this growing on this tree. It's about a foot across. She has a couple great pictures of this. They thought we would find it of great interest and wonder what it is.
Yeah, this one's very common right now. This is a Dryad saddle mushroom, or also known as a pheasant's back mushroom. I often say that pathologists aren't the greatest with naming, and as we look at these mushrooms, the top of them really does look like has that kind of pheasant pattern. But this is a very common mushroom that is found growing on different trees. Serioporus squamous is the scientific name for it. In terms of edibility, I also always get questions about edibility with this guy. This is one of the few mushrooms that there's not a lot of lookalikes for it, and so it's very easy to identify. And basically, if you can cut a knife easily through it, it should be good eating. That said, always want to make sure you know exactly what sort of mushroom it is before you do any consumption.
All right, excellent. And your next two are interesting story. It's a piece of wood cut from a tree that was live in March. So it's been in the house. They've been playing with it, and then all of a sudden, it's grown hair. What is this?
Yeah, hopefully it's not an alien invasion, but it's. So not entirely sure what is going on with this one. The first thing that I had noticed were those orange specks that we're seeing that we can see on this picture here, and that's very common with some of our Nectria cankers. And our Nectria cankers, when they're in sufficient humidity, they can produce some spore masses that kind of ooze out or kind of grow up almost like hairs, but they tend not to be that long. So I'm kind of suspecting that it might be a phycomyces fungus, and that's a very common contaminant. We often find it growing on bread or other things. It's one of the most common contaminants that I find in the lab when I'm trying to isolate things from plant tissue. But just really long filamentous stalks is what they produce, and that's what it looks like is going on there. But again, I'm not 100% sure.
So you would not leave that in your room to play with?
I probably wouldn't, unless you are hoping to maybe get the aliens to come and visit and say hello. That may be a good sign.
All right, thanks, Kyle. All right, Jeff, your first three pictures are a Brownville viewer. They cut this tree down, so we have foliage to identify, and then we have what happened when they cut it down. And she says, what is this? What is happening here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's interesting. It looks like a black walnut to me, a black walnut sapling, a young tree. And the sap, the liquid with that can be, it could be a variety of colors. It could be light colored, it could be a dark brown. This is obviously very unusual, but obviously in this case, assuming somebody wasn't nearby that got cut by whatever they were using, and they're just not confessing. But I'm assuming that's just what it is here, and it's hard to say what caused this. It could be the soil that it's in. Something may have contributed to it being that color. But yeah, it's outrageous.
On a maple.
Yeah.
Or a walnut.
On a walnut, yeah.
All right, and then you have one more picture, and this one is actually a viewer who sent this one in. This was a newly cut crab apple, and saw essentially it's almost the same thing, maybe a paler color.
Yeah, and that seems different to me. To me, that seems like something that's part of the tissue, not so much part of the sap. Yep. And with that decay there, that's why I was wondering if maybe it was some sort of fungus or something like that may have caused that.
Yeah, because there definitely are some fairly bright red mushrooms and fungi that can infect trees. That might be what we're dealing with. Typhoeria is one of them, but not entirely sure.
Okay.
All right, excellent and strange.
Yeah.
All right, well, we've all seen some pretty weird bumps and disfigured leaves on trees around our home. What are they? For our first feature tonight, Jody Green talks about galls, what causes them, and what, if anything, you can or should do about them.
So what are galls? Galls are the plant's response to a stimulus, and that could be an insect, a mite, bacteria, or fungi. And what happens is the plant creates these distortions of tissue. It's very similar to like a benign tumor in a human, where the feeding may stimulate the plant to have this abnormal growth. And when we see them, it's probably too late. The insect is already inside developing or have already left. Galls can be identified by the type of plant, the location of the plant, and what it may resemble. Some common names of galls that we see in Nebraska include the oak bullet gall, which look like little round spheres on the twig. We also have oak apple gall, which look like these larger spheres resembling apples on the leaf. We also have oak rosette galls that look like little rosettes on the twigs. And then we've got things like maple bladder gall and linden finger gall, which look like little fingers that are coming out of the leaf. So again, descriptive, but also very vague. There's also an ash flower gall on the male ash trees that look like clumps in the tree. People get pretty worried about them, but it's just the tree's response to a feeding organism. Some gall makers include insects, such as midges, which is also another name for a small fly. We also have cynipid wasps, which are really teeny tiny little flies that can be making these galls. We also have adilgids and aphid-like insects. There are also mites that can cause galls on leaves. The important thing to know is none of these gall-making organisms are pests of humans, and they can't bite, and they will not cause adverse human health effects. When an organism induces these galls, or the plants to make these galls, what it does, it creates a protective place for them to feed on that plant and develop. And what happens during long-term infestations is that the adult emerges, mates, and then lays eggs again on that host plant. Unfortunately, because these galls are constructed in such a way that it protects that organism, insecticides are not going to be effective. There are over 600 species of galls in oak trees in North America, so you can see that there are so many different kinds. They're often unevenly distributed on your property, so some trees may have them and some trees won't. And then on some trees, they may have more galls on some locations than others, and that's pretty normal too. Only the actively growing tissue can induce galls, and what may happen with a great infestation is that it may stunt the growth of that plant. So the best thing to do when you have galls is to prune them off if you can reach them. You could even get one of those long pruners and prune them off. So next time you see something strange on your plant, on your tree, think about whether it could be a gall. We do have the gall to complain about what's happening, but there's not a lot that we can do. So when you see these oddities, just appreciate them and go back and enjoy the beauty in your garden.
Jody's feature did remind me of something that Fred Baxendale used to say, which is, it's all part of nature's wondrous pageantry. All right, Matt, your next one. She lives outside the city and they're trying to get rid of the weeds. She's identified one as pokeweed and one as stinging nettles. She used Roundup extended control and sprayed, but nothing has happened. What does she do to, those are both perennial weeds.
Yeah, so Roundup generally will work when they're young, but sometimes, and if you use this extended control, it probably has pre-emergent in it as well. So if you want to try and establish something there, it's going to be near impossible, like grass. But if you just want to keep the area clean, these stinging nettles, using a 2,4-D based product with fluroxapyr in it, if you can find one with that ingredient, and also dicamba. Those three-way products work really well on these broadleaf weeds. You just got to be careful that they're not in an area where you have other sensitive plants. Otherwise, just mowing them off can actually control them. Just keeping them mown will take care of the plant as well.
All right, excellent. So your next one is, you have two pictures of this one, and it's been growing wild in the rock garden for about 5 years. She's getting rid of the rocks and replanting new plants, but she wants all of this gone. She's used Roundup and she's used Weed Be Gone, and doesn't make any difference.
So when I first looked at this, it does look similar to a wild violet plant. I don't know if it ever set flowers on it. So I'm leaning towards that's what it is, because if it's been there for many years, it can have a pretty good root system. And the way that those are kind of coming out of there, it does resemble wild violet. So getting rid of them, if there's not a lot of them, pulling them out is going to be the best way, especially if you have other susceptible plants so you're not spraying. But that Weed Be Gone product should work on the wild violet itself. It's just be careful not to get it around those other plants that are sensitive. Otherwise, digging them out is the best option.
All right, thank you, Matt. You have kind of a pile here, Kyle.
All right.
The first is a Lincoln viewer that has hawthorn, and he has two pictures. The damage occurs almost every year. He treats for cedar apple rust. Is he treating for the right thing, and is that what this is?
I don't think so. So I think this is actually an insect issue. To me, this looks like Hawthorne Leaf Miner, which is always active right around this time of May, or this time of year, late May into early June. The adults live in the soil. They then will fly up. It's a sawfly. They'll fly up and lay their eggs in the leaves, and the larvae then go to the leaf tips and kind of cause this damage that we're seeing. Rarely of any sort of concern, so not a whole lot to do. Unfortunately, it's one of those things that you may have to live with.
All right. Your next two pictures are a Lincoln viewer that has a crabapple that gets sprayed for cedar apple rust. Blooms beautifully, and it's on a spray program. Gets sprayed a lot, it sounds like, but this year it's doing this.
And this is scab. Apple scab is running rampant this year, and even with a very dedicated spray program, if you have a highly susceptible apple tree or crab apple in the landscape, we can still see a lot of injury occurring. If you think about the weather that we've had in Lincoln the past couple of weeks, it's been fairly moderate temperatures and a lot of moisture. And unfortunately, sometimes the fungus can really outdo things. Other thing we want to think about with apple scab, and if we do have a tree on a fungicide program, we need to make sure that we are rotating our active ingredients. Apple scab, the fungus can become resistant to quite a few of the common fungicides that are used for it. So one question to ask the tree company that is applying the fungicide, whether or not they are rotating those active ingredients.
All right, your next two pictures are also Lincoln. It's also a crabapple. They do treat also for cedar apple rust. but this year they think there's some things a little different in the leaves. So I think we have a second picture on this one.
Yep, and once again, this is scab, and so different tree varieties, slightly different symptoms, but often we have those large kind of dark blotches. Eventually, that entire leaf will become fairly chlorotic, like we saw in the previous one. But the exact same principle applies as the previous one. If we are thinking about fungicides, make sure we are rotating those active ingredients, but really sanitation at the end of the year, so making sure that we are picking up all of those leaves. And when it comes time to plant a new tree, we really want to be looking for a resistant variety to scab.
Exactly. All right, thanks, Kyle. All right, many people have this question, Jeff. The first two pictures are sycamores in Blair, 80 and 90 years old. They watch and they know we've said patience, but this is a little different. What should they be patient? What's going on here? And then your third picture is also a sycamore that also doesn't look very good.
Okay.
So what do we think here on these three?
Well, without sounding like Kyle, this is anthracnose.
Right.
So we're seeing a lot of anthracnose because of the weather conditions. Yeah. Our sycamores and London plane trees on campus are going through the same thing right now. So, and it does, I know we maybe talked about weather with some of these things and all that. That may contribute to a little bit of this, but I think that this is typical of our spring anthracnose and our sycamores.
All right, and your next two pictures are a Council Bluffs viewer. She says this tree is within 20 feet of the house. The bark has fallen away from about a third of it. The base has some deterioration, a large limb dead and hanging over the house. A couple of tree removal companies said it had a few years left. What would you do?
It doesn't have a few years left.
It shouldn't have any weeks left.
It's for all practical purposes dead. So
Yeah.
I think if it's close to your home, I would try to get it out as soon as possible.
Right, before it takes you home.
Right.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Well, I promise we're going to get some things planted soon in the garden, but we just haven't had a very clear day to get that done yet. So let's take a minute to see what Terry James has to say out at the Backyard Farmer Garden.
This week in the Backyard Farmer Garden, things got on hold because of weather and because of wet soil, but we're looking at our plants and ready to put them in. Some of you may be a little bit behind because of weather also, just like us. So when you start to plant, make sure that you actually look at those plants, pull them out of the containers, look at that root structure really well. If it's really root bound, make sure that you take those roots and kind of tease them apart to give them the best opportunity for them to get started. That's what we're doing here in the Backyard Farmer Garden. Make sure that some of those plants, like the tomatoes, plant as deep as you can. Remember, those stems will actually produce new roots. So be careful with some of those plants that you haven't gotten in the ground yet. Check them out. That's what we're gonna do here in the Backyard Farmer Garden. So stop by and check it out.
And right now it is time for the lightning round. Are you ready, Jeff?
I guess so.
This is a Weimar viewer who listens to us when we talk about pruning lilacs. She has a hedge. We talk about pruning a third of the plant. How low do you go, and do you have to do that every single year?
You would go very low. You want to get down there 6 inches, 4 inches, something like that. And I do it in cycles, maybe do it for a couple of years, give it a break, do it for a couple of years, that sort of thing.
All right. This is a Gretna viewer that has curling leaves on an old beauty bush. Insects, drift, any idea?
Well, I would turn it over, look for some insect damage. If there's aphids, that certainly could be one of the concerns right now, and it might be drift. So certainly we're seeing a lot of that.
All right. This is an Omaha viewer who has old azaleas and wants to know when to prune them and how.
Well, if they're done blooming, this would be the time. The video will talk a little bit about that. And, you could look at, if they're really old, you could look at maybe being a little aggressive, knowing that it'll take a few years for them to recover.
All right. This is a viewer that has the tree roots of maples between the sidewalk and the curb. Should they cover those with soil or cut them off?
I think they should plant something between the roots and not worry about it. That's what I would say.
All right, nice job. All right, Kyle, next up. Are you ready?
As ready as I'll ever be, I suppose.
Okay, this is also this is also a viewer who apparently has watched us in previous years, and her asparagus was curling on the top. There were crown issues that we mentioned, so she needs to dig and wonders, can she replant in the same spot if it was a crown issue in the asparagus?
If it's a crown issue, I would move to a different spot if able.
All right. This is a viewer that has allium, and she's saying it's chives. All of a sudden collapsed, and it looked kind of funky and rusty on the foliage. Do chives or onions get a rust of some sort?
I'm not aware of any, but there are a lot of rusts out there that haven't been very well defined, so it's possible. Send a sample in if you can.
All right. Speaking of rust, lots of questions about controlling the orange rust on fern leaf buckthorn.
Yeah. If you're already seeing those big orange pustules, you're likely a little bit too late. If you want to control them, you'll want to start earlier next year.
All right. Dead tips in the cedars. This is beaver crossing. Is that winter or disease?
Most likely winter. However, it could be a few of our diseases. Phycomyces has been fairly active.
All right. Nice job. Ready, Matt?
Yeah, I'm gonna win, I suppose.
Maybe.
Try.
Let's see, I'll give you the path questions instead. All right, this is a Hastings viewer who is saying we're now recommending a pre-emerge in the fall for certain weeds, but when in the fall do we do pre-emerge?
Depending on what you're targeting. Winter annuals, if you're probably going to want to start earlier, let's say early September, maybe end of August for those, and then anytime after that for summer annuals, it'll carry over to the next year.
All right. On a previous show, Rock mentioned that he waters his lawn, his fescue lawn, only 4 to 5 times a year. So this viewer has plantation fescue, wants to know how to tell when you should water.
When it starts wilting, you can actually go down farther to a point to where it's wilting, and once you water it, it's going to recover. It's not going to die that fast or turn brown. It'll recover from a little bit of drought stress.
All right, this is a Stromsburg viewer who wonders, is it time for the second pre-emergence application if the first one went down in early May?
I would not think that it would be. We've had some cooler temps, so it's going to be a little bit farther back. I would wait till middle of June.
All right, and this is a West Point viewer who wonders, is it time now for weed and feed on the lawn?
Yeah, weed and feed works well for a lot of those broadleaves. Make sure it's wet when you're applying, and it should help control some of those summer annuals that we're going to be seeing here soon.
All right, nice job, all.
Didn't win though.
You didn't win.
Couldn't talk fast.
And they weren't really lightning questions. They were heat lightning questions. All right, Jeff, plants of the week.
Yeah, you brought in some cool plants here. So the tall one here is Warax penstemon. So it's a shell leaf variety selection. So it's pretty cool. And you said it seeds itself. Like most penstemons will seed themselves if conditions are kind of right. Mm-hmm. They don't have to be super right, but. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And that one is one that Harlan Hammernick found at Rest Stop Warax.
Okay. Oh, right.
Yeah.
Cool. Mm-hmm. So the next one with the purple stems and the white flowers is Dark Towers penstemon. And is this a Dale Lindgren selection? So out at North Platte. Mm-hmm. Again, another cool one. And then you have mustard. So the lower leaves here is the giant red mustard.
Which you're going to tast on air. So
okay, all right, okay.
So that we can see whether or not it really is mustardy.
Decide what fungicide you apply to it. I'm supposed to be able to tell.
In the backyard farmer garden, no fungicides.
Okay. But what the fun idea behind this is using, looking for ornamental vegetables.
Right.
Something that just kind of, instead of the usual sort of things, looking for some of those things that are a little different. The leaf shapes, something like that might be a little different you could try.
Right. you know, and some of those early leafy greens like this, right now they're just spectacular. It's been a perfect year for them, and they're really pretty. And of course, this is all in the Backyard Farmer Garden, so visit. All right, next round of pictures. Let's see, Matt. This is an Omaha viewer who is, and we can see this in Lincoln too, of course. What is this ground cover weed in their easement, and is it a keeper or a killer?
It could be a keeper if you want it to just sit there and have those nice pretty yellow flowers, and it'll grow throughout the season. It is a summer annual black medic. It has those yellow clusters of flowers, and it does well where it's at in that hot area right next to the sidewalk and the road. So if you want to leave it there, it's going to be green cover. You can mow it. It has a short growth pattern and just kind of prostrate, stays along the ground. And it'll be there till it freezes. So it's one that you could leave there just for green cover, or if you want to control it, a lot of the three-way products that we'd normally use, or quinclorac is another one that works well in clover, would be a product to kill it off. If you're going to seed, quinclorac would be better because you wouldn't have any negative effects from 2,4-D. All
right. And your next two pictures are a Valley, Nebraska viewer. And they're using a, they want to kill these, here's the two kill, and then they're using a Fertilome product and to spray the weeds. So they don't seem to think this is working. Should they try something else?
The active ingredients in this product, actually, I think you actually gave a rate too of 2 ounces per gallon.
Right.
So that should cover roughly 1,000 square feet. Check the label. And this product actually has a good combination. It's a 4-way product. It has Carfentrazone in it, which is a great product for initial burn down. So when you spray that, you should actually see effects that same day or the next day because it works really fast. It's a contact herbicide. And then the other ones obviously translocate into the plant. So it should work well on that, the clover. I think that was also black medic, so it should work on controlling it at the rates you're using.
All right, so maybe just timing or something.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Usually
works?
That combination should work pretty good.
All right, thanks, Matt. Okay, you have another series here, Kyle.
All right.
The first one here is, the first three actually go together. This is Aurora, assuming this is a fungus among us. Your second one is Thurman, Iowa, and it's kind of an odd puff of these. And the third one is on a redbud. So there is the size of the old redbud, and then I think we have a lower picture on that. So what are all of these? And they do want to know if it's an issue at the base of that redbud.
So these are, assuming that there wasn't a chainsaw issue with the black walnut like Jeff was talking about earlier, and you haven't buried anyone, these are dead man's fingers. And so it's the mushrooms that come up, they kind of look like just like fingers coming up out of the soil. They'll often bend a little bit as well, so they even kind of have a knuckle appearance to them. They can have a few different colors, and they can change color over time too, which is kind of fun. Now, unfortunately, these dead man fingers are a xylaria mushroom or xylaria fungus, and some of our common black rots, especially of the base of trees, are also in that same group. So, if you see them growing on the base of a tree, that is generally a sign that the tree is maybe not too long for this world. Now you may find them elsewhere growing on mulch or even growing on wooden barrels, things like that, and they'll be just fine. But they do cause a trunk rot or a butt rot of the trees. So if you are seeing these, honestly, the tree does not look like it's in too bad of shape right now. So I would continue to monitor it. And whatever you can do to really just kind of baby it along. So make sure that it is well watered, that you have some nice mulch around it. But if you are starting to see other serious signs of decline, then you'll want to start thinking about a replacement.
All right, and your next one is just what is this? This is an Omaha viewer.
Yeah, this is, I think, one of our marasmius mushrooms. And so it's just one of our common little brown mushrooms. They're very common. They grow almost anywhere. They're feeding on some sort of woody material a little bit further down in the soil.
All right, and a final one here. This is Springfield. They're emerging daily near a spot where large trees came out. Can you get rid of them, and are they edible?
So these, I also think that these are another type of marasmius mushrooms. So the little brown mushrooms, again, they are feeding on that woody tissue underground, whether it's an old root system or something like that. If you want to get rid of them, you need to get rid of that food source. And so the best way to do that is to increase your fertilization of the lawn. That excess nitrogen helps break down the woody tissue down in the soil. As far as edibility, they can be. Certain types of marasmius mushrooms are edible. However, there are some very toxic lookalikes. So really want to be mindful. And if you are sending in pictures of mushrooms, it's very helpful to get a picture of the underside of the cap as well. Really helps in identification.
All right, thank you, Kyle. All right, you have 3 in a row that are what is wrong with my tomato here.
Okay.
And the first is Tecumseh, and the second is Lincoln. And the Lincoln viewer is asking, is this by drift? She's also using plant start right now and wondering if she should remove and start over. And the third one, she thinks it got hit with weed and feed. She hosed it off, but she's wondering if it was too much for it.
Looks like it, yeah.
So what do we do on all 3 of these?
I think in all 3 of these we start over.
Yeah.
I think, unfortunately, they all appear to be damaged from a herbicide exposure. So at this stage, I don't think it's anything that we want to keep.
All right, and I think there's also something viral that can occur.
There's curly top.
Curly top.
But I don't think any of those look like curly top to me.
No, I didn't think so either. I've gotten a lot of tomato samples the last couple of weeks as well, and we've done testing for curly top and have yet to find it. So it is out there, but there's a lot of herbicide floating around right now too.
Yeah.
All right, your next 2 pictures, Jeff, are a Blair, Nebraska viewer. This is a William Baffin rose, so it's a big old variety and 10 years old, 12 feet tall. She's wondering what's causing the strange appearance on the foliage.
Yeah, when I zoomed in closely to look at this, and it really looks like rose rosette to me. So I really think it is. The way the new growth, the new flower buds are all distorted, elongated, they're in bunches. It maybe does have the classic pink or red growth, but that's not on all the time that you'll see that. And so that's what it really looks like to me. You could certainly go in and do some pruning and prune out all the dead and all the stuff that looks like it doesn't belong, and just see if it continues to do that. But that's what I'm really thinking.
So not drift from one spot.
I don't think so. I don't, because it's kind of throughout the plant. When you kind of zoom in close, you can see several branches with it. So.
All right, and then your final one is simply an ID. This is a Bellevue viewer. She's wondering what this is.
Cyprus spurge. So, and it's, the spurges look very similar to each other. So, but that's one. And, it can be invasive, so it's something to think about. If that particular plant starts spreading around the yard, you might want to think about or keeping control of it, using some of the pre-emerges that we've talked about earlier in some of your garden spots to make sure that you don't have a problem with it.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Well, most of our spring flowering shrubs have shed their flowers. It's time to sharpen the pruning shears and get busy. Here's Jeff to help guide you as you cut out the damaged branches and shape those shrubs.
Well, our spring flowering shrubs should be wrapping up. Here on campus, our spirea are done, this forsythia is done, the viburnums have finished up, the lilacs are done, even the azaleas are wrapping up. So this is the prime time to come in and start doing that pruning you've been waiting for all spring. This is the time for us, as you can see, we've got some dead here. We want to take the dead out of this plant. Look at some of the bigger canes to help reduce the overall size of the plant, and then do some pruning for shape. So after you've done all that, then if there's a certain form you're looking for to fit the rest of your landscape, this is when we come in, heading back some of those canes to get it to the compact size that you want. You do the same sort of thing with spirea, looking at the dead. Some of our early flowering spirea, you want to do that too. Some of the ones that flower a little later, we'll wait on that. And then the same for our viburnums. Looking at our viburnums, taking out some of the bigger canes and working at bringing the overall size of those down. So just to emphasize again, when we're in here, so again, it's spring flowering's done. We're going to do some cleanup, do some shaping with these. Here's some big viburnums that we're looking at here. And so the purpose with these, we don't see a lot of dead. They actually look really good. They flowered nicely. They're starting to set some fruit. But this is a good time to take some of these bigger canes down to lower the overall size. So you have something that's gotten a little bit big in your yard, not in the right place for you, but you don't want to remove the plant. This is a good opportunity to take the overall size down, do a little pruning to make it a little bit more compact, and then repeat this process annually till you get it down to the size you want. So it takes a few years. You might have a 3 to 5 year period of annually coming in, doing a little bit of work, and you'll eventually keep that plant at the size that you really want it to be. So azaleas, again, spring flowering shrub. It's a little trickier. So we have a lot of forgiving growth with a forsythia or a viburnum or a spirea. You make the wrong cut, they grow so much in a single year, you won't see it by the end of the summer. So you don't have to worry about making some tragic mistake with that. And not that you're going to make a tragic mistake with your azaleas, but they grow slower. And so you want to think through your pruning a little bit. Again, it's the same sort of principles. We're looking at any dead wood that we have in here, any dead branches. If you have some damaged, maybe not so much crossing, but I'm worried about things that are rubbing that are causing some problems that way. So you'd want to look at the entire plant. And then, again, you want to look at the shape that you want. And over time, azaleas come in, they grow pretty slow. So you'll have it by your front door, let's say, and it's great. And then all of a sudden one year you notice you can't see your front door because the azalea's gotten 7 feet tall. It's important to think about that as you go through this process with the azalea. As you plant it, work it each year, do a little bit of pruning for shape after it's bloomed, and then it'll help keep the plant at the size that you desire it to be.
Jeff's been doing these pruning videos for the last 20 years. It's really great to have an expert like him showing us how and where to do those cuts. So thanks, Jeff, for doing that correctly. All right, last round here, Matt. This is a Shenandoah, Iowa viewer. A few of these have appeared in her flower beds. She's guessing it's a weed. She doesn't want to pull it until she's sure.
Maybe you should poke it, because it's a pokeweed, and then you can just cut it down. So yeah, just take that one out, I guess. You could pull it out. That would be pretty simple.
Or dig.
It is a weed. Yeah, get it down there deep because it does have a good root system.
And it's perennial.
Yeah.
All right, so your next one is a Springfield viewer, and we've had this one on before. We have a couple of pictures of this one, but this is on steroids. What's this?
Hemlock, poison hemlock. So it's actually a biennial. So 1 year it'll be a nice small plant, and then the next year it'll shoot up 7-8 feet. So you want to take care of that one by also digging a giant hole to get that taproot out. Or, yeah, I mean, in that situation where you only have a few, dig them out. No point in treating them.
All right, excellent, thanks. All right, Kyle, this is an elkhorn viewer, and this is the first we've gotten on our good old 9-bark. Had powdery mildew last year. It's already back this year. Does thinning the shrub by doing some pruning help, or what are we going to suggest here?
Yeah, really pruning to increase airflow through the canopy really should help with powdery mildew. The quicker that those leaves can dry off, the better. Unfortunately, when we have weather patterns like we've had the last couple of weeks with these constant rains, it can be very difficult to control. And so if you are looking for something, sulfur-based products tend to work fairly well for powdery mildew.
All right, and have you seen this on the ones on campus, Jeff?
I haven't seen it on campus, no. And you know, I guess they do pretty well in some shade, so I think people tend to use them where maybe they perform better in a sunnier spot, and then we wouldn't have as many issues with that.
Right, excellent. All right. Okay, and your next two pictures are actually, this is a St. Labori viewer. She's got a 30-tree windbreak, and she's seeing this sort of browning, and I think we have a couple more pictures on this one as well. Trunk and then the tips of the branches, and of course they don't really want to lose this? It's only 4 of the 30, but is this environmental? Are we into one of the pine diseases here?
Yeah, based on how we're seeing some of that browning from the base and moving up, it potentially could be disease. But when I zoomed in, I wasn't seeing any of the spots or kind of red bands that we tend to see with that. I think she had mentioned that a lot of the damage was on the south side as well. So I'm leaning towards winter injuries, potentially some drought issue. Also, one of those pictures showed some white pitch kind of on the trunk as well, which could be an indication that you're dealing with cystospore, canker as well. And so a few different things going on, but water and doing anything else you can to kind of baby those trees along, make sure they're happy, should help.
And a sample if in
Yep.
doubt.
When in doubt, send a sample in.
All right. Okay. So Jeff, your first 3 pictures are. This is a Grand Island viewer. She has one of the newer red buds, which is called Rising Sun. Struggling. She thinks maybe she's planted it too deep. She took some of the extra soil away. She's been watching some other plants with sort of the same issue. And she also has surrounded these with something called water rounds to help prevent runoff and hold the mulch in these areas. So some of the trees are in rock. She doesn't really want to mulch. She's wondering, should she uncover the base, and what should she really do? I think her real one here is Rising Sun that she's really most concerned about.
Yeah, well, I think with any of them, like you were just talking about, I think it's fine that she has an edging material. I would widen that area out quite a bit. It would be nice to have it 3-4 feet away from the base of the tree. Make sure we get that soil away from there, because even if she has lowered the soil around there, and you know, it's good on her to identify maybe if buried or put them in too deeply, planted too deeply. We need to kind of widen that all out because that area is staying probably too wet for it. But I think I would start with that. I don't see a lot of dieback. It's a little thin, so I think we're still okay.
It's kind of an unusual location for a red bud to begin with, and I don't know that this one is one of the better of the cultivars. We'll have to see.
I think with any redbud cultivars, I question any of them, quite honestly. Other than our native ones, our Nebraska redbuds do great.
Yeah, they do. They do. All right. And then your final picture question here is: this is an Omaha viewer, this is actually a silver maple that put on a tremendous amount of seed. And of course, his concern and his question was, will the tree recover if every single branch was a little helicopter instead of a leaf?
You know, I would have my concerns. This would be a tree I would watch. I think that there's a real good chance that you don't see this tree fully leaf out, and I have a feeling that it's probably declining. And that's why it did what it is, spent the last bit of its energy on producing seed.
Right.
So
watch it, especially that close to the house.
Yeah, right.